Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been taken to hospital after being shot during a campaign speech in Nara. Japan's public broadcaster NHK reported that local firefighters said he was showing no vital signs. A man in his 40s has been arrested at the scene in Japan's west. Shinzo Abe served as Prime Minister twice, most recently from 2012 to 2020. A press conference is expected shortly. Now, our former North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer joins us now. Jake, what is Shinzo Abe's condition at this point?
Well, Gemma, we understand from local firefighters and as reported by NHK, Japan's public broadcaster, that Shinzo Abe has no vital signs. And I want to explain to you what that means because it might sound unusual, but it's a particular quirk about Japan. And authorities tend to declare people with no vital signs who have died, but that is yet to be certified by medical authorities. Now, I want to stress that that is not clear that this is the circumstance in this case, but historically, when people say that there are no vital signs, that tends to be that they're yet to be formally pronounced dead by medical authorities.
Jake, what do we understand happened today?
Yeah, reports are incredibly sketchy at the moment. There's sort of some vision floating around on social media, but it appears that former Prime Minister Abe was shot in the back, and beyond that he collapsed and there was some blood. A local NHK reporter at the scene said he heard what sounded like gunshots, but again, it's a breaking situation, so a lot of the detail is yet to be confirmed beyond that. No doubt in that press conference that we're expecting later, we should get a little bit more information on that.
And already a man in custody.
Yes, that's right, and no doubt there'll be a great deal of questioning, but of course because this is so early, we don't know a great deal about this man, who he is, what his background is. But what we do know is that gun violence in Japan is extraordinarily rare. You just don't see it. If I think back to my 4 years in Japan, I can only think of a handful of situations where there was some kind of gun-related violence, and it always tended to be related to organised crime. It's actually very, very difficult to get a gun as a private citizen in Japan. The laws are exceptionally strict. You have to have a mandatory physical assessment, a mental health check, and that is quite strict. They will go to your friends and family and ask if you have any violent tendencies. So, with that in mind, it's actually quite interesting to note that it was the United States, of all places, that's the reason for these incredibly strict gun laws in Japan. And that's because in World War II, when the United States occupied Japan, they effectively disarmed the country, and to the point that it really has never rearmed since. And people have been very comfortable with that because gun crime has been so low and the streets have largely been so safe.
Jake, we understand he was making a campaign speech at the time. What was the event that he was at?
Yeah, so this was held in Nara in Western Japan. It's relatively close to Kyoto, where many Australians would know. It's part of an election campaign that is ongoing at the moment. Now, Shinzo Abe is a former Prime Minister of Japan. He resigned a few years ago due to ill health. Japan's had a couple of prime ministers since then, Yoshihide Suga and Fumio Kishida, but Shinzo Abe still holds an incredible amount of clout within the party. He is an elder statesman of the party because he brought so much stability to Japan. If you think back to before Shinzo Abe, it was a revolving doors of prime ministers within the ruling LDP. So he brought a great deal of stability to the country and still holds a great deal of influence within the party, and has always had a great relationship with Australia. He had quite a good relationship with a former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, to the point when Scott Morrison came here for a visit a few years ago. Even though Shinzo Abe was a former Prime Minister, they still had a pretty jovial lunch together.
Jake, as a political figure, I mean, people can love you, they can hate you, they can love what you do, hate what you do. What was the public sentiment around Shinzo Abe, his time as Prime Minister and also since then?
Yeah, well, he had certainly been around for a very long time, so I don't think you go for that long in politics without getting your fair share of detractors. There was a lot of criticism of his handling of the COVID pandemic at the time and the way that Japan was handling that. But now, if you look back and see, Japan has handled COVID as one of the best countries on earth in terms of the number of deaths that have been reported. You look back and I think you probably think of things slightly differently, but he certainly had been around for a great deal of time, was quite respected, and what we've seen in the opposition in Japan is that they were very disorganised, they were not unified, and so his LDP really didn't face any significant challenge in his time. There were a few elections, but none of them were particularly close. And even you can see that in the most recent elections in which Fumio Kishida won his government, the current Prime Minister, won quite comfortably as well, more comfortably than people were predicting. So in terms of politics in Japan, it tends to be the LDP, and Shinzo Abe's great tenure, his long time there is certainly a big part of that.
Jake, well wishes out of the United States. We've also had our former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull saying that he's horrified by this terrible news. Shinzo Abe is one of the great leaders of our times. We must hope and pray that he pulls through. So shock for the public there in Japan, but shock right around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, the shock, you just don't hear about gun crime and gun violence in Japan. It's just so rare, let alone to hear this for a former Prime Minister. It really is quite extraordinary. But what Shinzo Abe did was put Japan very much on the world stage. He really sought out close relationships with the United States, with Australia, with a lot of leaders in the region. And, you know, you're seeing that in the kind of well wishes and messages that you're seeing tonight. It was quite interesting, obviously, the uncertainty that we saw with Donald Trump and what sort of geopolitical impact his presidency would have. Shinzo Abe very deliberately at the beginning sought to move much closer and have a very, very friendly relationship with Donald Trump to try to perhaps place Japan a little bit better off when it came to some of the more odd and erratic decisions that we saw from the US president. He wanted to put tariffs on Toyotas and a lot of Japanese car manufacturers. That ended up happening, but Japan and Shinzo Abe largely really sought to try to cultivate a very, very friendly relationship between the US and Japan, because they are two incredibly close allies, and Japan really needs the support of the United States. So it's not a great surprise that you would see those kind of tributes from world leaders coming in, given that Shinzo Abe sought to cultivate a very open and welcoming stance on the world stage with many world leaders.
Thank you for your insights there, Jake, on this breaking news. That's our former North Asia correspondent, Jake Sturmer. With me now is Japanese politics expert, Professor Ricky Kirsten in Canberra. Professor Kirsten, firstly, your reaction to what has happened today?
Well, of course, it's truly shocking. We don't expect to see this kind of violent crime involved in an election campaign in post-World War II Japan. And certainly Shinzo Abe, although he excites a lot of division and passion amongst different sides of the electorate, certainly gun crime is not the way that we expect this to be resolved in contemporary Japan.
Gun violence, shocking in any case, but this is a country where gun violence is so low, gun ownership rules are so tight.
Well, exactly. We often see knife crime, for example, if we see this kind of public violence or violence directed at public figures, or we see some kind of intimidation. So yes, it's a truly shocking development.
Now, we can't know the motivations behind this at this point, but what we do know is that Shinzo Abe was making a speech. The half upper house election is happening on Sunday. Is that significant an event?
I think it's extremely significant, and we should expect that this attempt on his life and possibly even his demise could be expected to impact on the election outcome. We might, for example, see a mobilisation of a sympathy vote amongst LDP supporters that will bring them out in greater numbers to the polls, and it might conceivably skew the results.
What's the public sentiment towards their longest-serving Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe?
Well, as I said before, really it's a sense of a divisive figure. On the one hand, he is a conviction nationalist. He makes no apologies for wanting Japan to be a country that is proud of its history, proud of its culture, and above all, for Japan to be what people refer to as a normal security actor, not constantly constraining itself and hemming itself in, including with Japan's post-war pacifist constitution. And this is where the controversy kicks in. And this has been a major issue discussed during this election campaign for the half upper house election. In other words, should Japan's constitution be revised to enable Japan to more effectively respond to its geopolitical environment? Or should Japan preserve its very proud 75-year history of absolute pacifism enshrined in law? This is what divides the electorate, and Shinzo Abe is unmistakably associated with the desire to revise the constitution, to stop apologising for the past, and for Japan to be a normal, capable security actor.
Yeah, that's some important context you're giving us there. We know that there is the presence, of course, of political extremism to the left and to the right in Japan. But you're saying that the actions that Shinzo Abe took can remain controversial in a heightened sense 2 years after his resignation.
Absolutely, because we see his successor, the successor to Prime Minister Suga, Prime Minister Kishida, on the campaign stump, arguing for Japan to develop a counterattack, or if you like, an offensive capability, something Japan has never had. Also, Kishida is campaigning for a doubling of Japan's defence budget. Once again, unprecedented. That degree of growth is something that some of the electorate might find hard to swallow. We're seeing Kishida campaign about Japan acquiring a missile defence capability. All of these things will excite passions amongst that constituency that regards the revision of Japan's post-war constitution as utterly unacceptable, on the one hand. On the other hand, we see those people and supporters of the Liberal Democratic Party in particular who are looking at China and looking at a nuclear-capable North Korea and asking themselves, can Japan actually defend itself in this growing, unstable strategic environment in Japan's own region?
And Professor Kirsten, as we await further news about Shinzo Abe's condition in hospital after he has, of course, been shot, there has been an outpouring of well wishes from right around the world.
Yes, of course. Shinzo Abe, one thing we know about him, he was the face of Japanese diplomacy internationally. I think without Shinzo Abe, we wouldn't have seen the revival of the Quad, for example, which has now become a very important part of Australia's own security policy internationally and in its region. We know that Shinzo Abe was a very well-travelled representative of Japan. He personally led Japan's diplomatic efforts internationally. He didn't assign them to a foreign minister and stay safely at home in his bunker. He has gone out into the world and promoted the things he believes in. So for a lot of reasons, Shinzo Abe has been the face of Japan, really since his first term in office in 2006. That's quite something on the global stage.
Japanese politics expert Professor Riki Kirsten, thank you for speaking with us.
My pleasure.